This is David Suissa. Welcome to my podcast. You're about to listen to an episode that I recorded last week with Brooke Goldstein, who runs the Lawfare Project. In that episode, we discuss a major case that they were working on, and it turns out that today, March 20th, there's a landmark settlement that was finally agreed and announced. And the university will acknowledge Zionism as an important part of Jewish identity and implement wide-ranging measures to protect Jewish students. Enjoy the episode. This is David Suissa. Welcome to my podcast. We have in our studios my friend Brooke Goldstein from New York.
Woohoo!
Woohoo. Brooke, welcome. What are you? My God.
I'm so grateful and happy to be here in sunny LA with you.
Well, look, you're a fighter, Brooke. I've known you for many years. I'm going to read the first paragraph. New York-based human rights attorney, film producer, director of the Lawfare Project, founding director of the Children's Rights Institute, adjunct fellow at the Hudson Institute. I've seen you on TV so many times.
That is an old bio.
It's an old bio, but all I know is that it's got the most important things in here, which is human rights attorney, film producer, and director of the Lawfare Project. And you were on our cover last week
Well,
for
my
one of your
client,
clients, right?
Yes, thank you for that coverage. I appreciate it.
Now, can you tell our listeners a little bit what the situation is there? Because your mission in life is just to fight for justice
Right.
for
So
the Jewish people?
Yes, I run the world's only Jewish civil rights litigation fund. And we support groundbreaking civil rights litigation on behalf of Jewish communities around the world. And one of the things we do is provide pro bono counsel to anyone who is targeted because of their religious identity or ethnic identity, being Judaism. And we have a situation, I'm sure you've covered it quite extensively in your paper and on your podcast, which is the rise of anti-Semitism on American college campuses. And we have two very significant lawsuits happening right now, one against San Francisco State University, and the trial is scheduled for March 18th in state court. And we have a legal action on behalf of Professor Jeffrey Lax against the City University of New York. And we've also been retained by Professor Michael Goldstein, whose story you covered what was it, last week in the paper. And all of our clients are experiencing a level of anti-Semitism, a hostile environment where they are not able to participate in government-funded programs, whether they're students who want to engage in student fairs or have speakers, or professors who are literally being targeted by school administrations, which is Mike Goldstein's case, because he is a conservative Zionist Jew. Michael, what's happening to him is outrageous. He has been physically threatened. His property has been destroyed. Nails were put in his tires. A picture of his 14-year-old daughter was distributed, thousands of leaflets with a Nazi insignia on it, and calling for his firing because he is a Jew.
And how are you helping him fight back?
So we provide pro bono legal counsel. What is happening to Jewish students and professors on college campuses is illegal.
It's against the law.
It is illegal.
So what's the status of that case in CUNY?
CUNY, there's the case that is now underway is on behalf of Professor Jeffrey Lax. Now, Jeff Lax has been subject to an enormous amount of discrimination because of his ethnic and religious identity by administrators at CUNY. Administrators were even caught on tape saying there are too many Jews on campus. I mean, can you imagine if the same thing was said, saying there are too many blacks on campus, there are too many Muslims on campus. But that is how the administration talks about Jews.
It sounds so un-American.
And it's a violation of his basic civil rights. And so we're litigating an employment discrimination case.
That's the kind of stuff you used to hear from, years ago. Remember when Jews were not allowed to go to Ivy League schools and everything?
Yes,
Yeah,
and now they're trying to kick the Jews off and creating an environment that is so hostile, like at CUNY and also at San Francisco State University.
So let's talk about San Francisco State, because there's a hearing, right, coming right up. So just give us a little background on exactly the case, who were the clients, and how did they call you and so forth.
So the case against San Francisco State University, there is a federal case and a state case, but they're basically surrounding two instances. One was the hostile takeover and shutting down of the event featuring the former Jerusalem mayor Nir Barkat. When Hillel invited the Jerusalem mayor to come speak, he was shouted down by an angry mob. And further, when the campus police were about to remove the students who were violating school policy using amplified sound when they're not entitled to do that, there's no heckler's veto in this country, the campus police were given a stand-down order by the administration and told not to intervene.
When did this happen?
So Nir Barkat, I believe, spoke about 2 years ago now at San Francisco State University. I'd have to look up the exact date.
Right.
I should know it.
So who called you?
And so we're alleging, obviously, First Amendment violations. And then I'll tell you what's so significant there is because those of us in this space who are monitoring the rise of hostility and anti-Semitism on American college campuses are seeing that it's really kicking up notch by notch. And groups like SJP are
Students
looking,
for Justice in Palestine.
and administrators are looking to see how the Jewish community responds. They're looking to see, how do campus police respond? How do university administrators respond when we engage in this type of activity? And when you have a university who literally tells the campus police to stand down when there is an angry mob threatening violence against other students, that sends the message, the green light to continue attacking Jewish students with impunity. So we intend to right that wrong and have been providing, together with the amazing law firm of Winston & Strawn, who has donated countless of hours of pro bono support, over $2.5 million of pro bono
for this particular
legal support
case.
for this one particular case.
And what's
for
the
these
hearing
students.
about? March 19th?
So on March 18th, this coming March 18th, the state court, and that case surrounds the denial of the ability of the Jewish student group Hillel to be present at a Know Your Rights fair. There was a fair where all student groups were invited to participate, and the school purposefully discriminated against the Jewish student group and denied them the ability to table at the fair. And the school admits this. They say, yes, they were denied, they were discriminated against, but it's not because of anti-Semitism. It's because they are Zionists. And Zionist is a political point of view, and it's not a protected category, and it's not religious discrimination, which is their argument. Obviously, anyone who's familiar with Judaism and Zionism knows that the two are absolutely connected and integral. I mean, Zionism is the national liberation movement of the world's oldest ethnic minority. We pray facing Jerusalem. We say next year in Jerusalem. Zionism is not a political stance. It's not a support of any one government, whether it's Netanyahu or other that's democratically elected. It is merely the position that you believe the state of Israel should exist and Jews have the right to exercise self-sovereignty. But more importantly, only the Jewish students were given a political litmus test in order to participate. When the Iranian student group wanted to table, or another student group wants to table, hypothetically say an Iranian student group wants to table, they're not asked, well, what is your position on Iranian nuclear disarmament? Unless you are of the same position that I am, you're not allowed to participate in the fair. They don't say to a Chinese student group, what is your position on China's one-child policy? Unless we agree, you can table. But when the Jews come and want to table, say, hey, you Jews, what is your position, you American Jew with no connection whatsoever to the Israeli government? What is your position on occupation or settlements or these David Horowitz posters? And unless you answer the way I want you to answer, you're a bad Jew and you're not allowed to participate. That, on its face, is religious discrimination. To make a Jew pass some sort of political litmus test to declare they're Zionist or not Zionist before they participate in a fair, that in and of itself is religious discrimination.
You know what's crazy?
Quoi?
Well, we've just spent year after year on talking about microaggressions, the right of college students to have a safe space so that they can be protected from, God forbid, an email that offends them regarding Halloween costumes. There might be a little passage of Charles Dickens or or Shakespeare that offends them, hurts their feelings, and so forth. So we're, awash in a world of microaggressions. And here, we're talking about macroaggressions.
Right.
So here we are. There's a whole track of protecting college students from microaggressions. And yet, so many Jews on college campuses are experiencing macroaggressions. And this is what you're dealing with. How do you
there's a
square this circle?
They can't be squared because there's a clear double standard here. And it's playing out also on the national level where the Democratic Party has failed to unequivocally condemn anti-Semitism, the world's oldest hatred. And when you cannot unequivocally condemn anti-Semitism, I think it's a very scary moment.
This case in San Francisco that you're involved with, it could become epic. And I'll tell you, because you're striking a real nerve here. This is the idea of anti-Semitism hiding behind anti-Zionism. And aren't you exactly on that nerve right there?
Well,
in this
that is
case?
exactly the issue at the case.
So when are we going to see a resolution on the case, do you think?
Well, obviously, like any good lawyer, I'd like to say that we're going to settle it tomorrow. I would hope that we could potentially settle a case.
Right?
But, the case is scheduled to go to trial this March 18th. And again, it is really, I think, one of the most important cases, if not in American Jewish history, but American history, because we're really arguing that Jewish students have a right not to be discriminated against on campus.
Let's keep really close on that one, Brooke, or maybe we'll send a writer up there. I think it's great. Let's go. Let's talk about this hatred of Jews. I mean, there's a whole school of thought that says this has been the greatest country in the world for Jews, and I'm a firm believer in that. Just the great Jewish love affair between the Jews in America. I've written about it. I've read about it. It's just something that gives me the goosebumps. And at the same time, we're seeing this kind of revival of anti-Jewish sentiment in pockets across the country. And I wonder what's at the core of this besides the usual answers. I mean, do we just make lousy victims?
Well, that's like the $1 million question.
Are we too white?
Us?
Are Jews too successful, too
Right,
powerful, too white at a time when those who are really honored on the food chain of victims, are we just too low on that chain?
It puzzles me as much as it puzzles you. I'm not a psychologist or an anthropologist, but what I can say, and I think it plays off the theme that we were just talking about with SFSU, is that people justify anti-Semitism saying, well, I don't agree with your politics, therefore I can discriminate against you because you're a bad Jew. And what we have now in the country is justification of anti-Semitism, like Congresswoman Ilhan Omar saying, well, can't she criticize Israel? Isn't it okay to engage in a debate about this? And obviously the answer is yes. We can, of course, criticize the policies of government, but
that's not what she did.
Not what she's doing. She's not talking about the legality of a Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria. She's not complaining about, the treatment of an Arab minority community by the Netanyahu government. She's free to talk about it. She'd probably be wrong, but she's free to debate it. She is saying that American Jews buy off politicians and have dual loyalties. These are the oldest anti-Semitic tropes in the book. And obviously the question to that is, where is her loyalty? This is a woman who is working less for her constituents and more to undermine and target a minority community in this country. She is a member of a movement, the BDS movement, that argues for illegal commercial discrimination against Jews and against Israelis. She argues for the annihilation and the genocidal annihilation of the Jewish state. Her tweets read as though they have been written by the PLO. Okay, the things that she says you would expect to hear in an Iranian mosque, not by a member of the U.S. government. So I ask, where is her allegiance? Is it with American values, or is it with those who wish to destroy American values?
Well, my biggest beef with Ilhan Omar is she's abandoned the Palestinians. She does nothing for them. She never promotes their cause. She doesn't promote any policies that can help the Palestinians.
Well, the entire pro-Palestinian movement has abandoned the Palestinians. I risked my life when I was 24 years old with my co-producer and co-director, Alistair Leyland, who I met at McGill, to make a movie about the human rights abuses happening against innocent Palestinian Muslim children at the hands of the PA, the PLO, Islamic Jihad. We secured first-hand interviews with leaders of the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades, with Hamas, with Fatah. We went into schools run by Islamic Jihad to raise awareness of the fact that Muslim children deserve to be protected. They deserve to have an education system free of incitement to hate and violence. And what happens? Those who are in the so-called pro-Palestinian movement turn around and call us Islamophobes. We're Islamophobic for advocating that Palestinian Arab children deserve a future of peace and not one of death and jihad. And that really is the case. The entire movement has nothing to do with securing, a state for a Palestinian Muslim community. If that was the case, the state would have existed 20 years ago. They've been offered it 3 times. 3 times they've denied it.
Not to mention 47.
No, the entire movement is built around one thing and one thing only, which is genocidal Jew hatred and hatred of the infidel. And it's a radicalized theological movement that's been repainted and repackaged as a civil rights movement, and it's anything but, because it literally supports the parties that are recruiting innocent Muslim children, strapping bombs on them and blowing them up by remote control. How could you possibly argue for a state of Palestine run by the PA that currently is engaged in the systematic murder, infanticide of its own children?
Well, the great irony when you come here to America and you see that so many Jews, are liberal, progressive Jews who go fight for the rights of genocide in Sudan and help the Muslims and involved with so many great liberal causes. And you see somebody like Ilhan Omar or Tlaib and, Cortez. I don't think they realize that these Jews that they're turning off are so much on their side.
But they're not. I mean, the opposite. First of all, I've always said that Zionism is the original progressive value, the way that we traditionally have defined the term progressive and liberal, until it's been completely perverted and subjective.
It's a dirty word now in America.
Right, but what's really depressing is how some Jews consider it to be a dirty word. But I want to get back to that point of Zionism as a progressive value, because it was the first political philosophy ever to argue that an ethnic minority has the right to national sovereignty. It was one of the first states ever in the modern world to have a female as the head of state. It was the first and only, and remains the only state in the Middle East that affords equal protections for women, for homosexuals, and so forth. It is a progressive value, and that's undeniable. The reason why people fail to make that connection is because the term progressivism and liberalism has been completely redefined and perverted by a movement that seeks not to uphold women's rights, because then they would be talking about female genital mutilation and the fact that over 200,000 American Muslim girls are subjected to FGM every year illegally in this country. They wouldn't have a leader,
FGM,
female genital mutilation. They wouldn't have a leader who is buddies with Farrakhan, who's the modern day Hitler. Okay. They wouldn't be led by a woman who's connected, Linda Sarsour, to PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. The progressives wouldn't be glorifying Layla Khaled, a female hijacker who murdered civilians. These are not progressive values. And if you pick up a dictionary and read the definition of the term, it doesn't include advocating for the terroristic murder of innocent civilians, which is what the so-called leaders of the perverted women's rights movement are doing. So really everything's been turned on its head.
Right. I have a lot of sympathy for how the Palestinian conflict has come to dominate so much of the thinking about Israel, how it's drowned out a lot of these great points that we make about Israel, progressive values, and so forth. And sometimes I wonder if the Palestinian conflict did not exist.
It doesn't exist.
Well,
there is no such thing
correct,
as an Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
But just for the sake of discussion, let's just say that there already was a Palestinian state.
There is a Palestinian state.
In
It's
Jordan.
called Jordan.
Correct.
Which is like 85% Palestinian Muslim ruled by a Hashemite king. But
Correct. But if we just as a thought experiment just assume that it was not even on the agenda of the world, of the media and everything, I just wonder if the situation for Israel would be different.
first of
vis-a-vis the
all,
world.
you know who determines the situation for Israel? Jews, and how we behave, and if we're united and we protect ourselves
That's never
and
gonna
act
happen.
rationally. But I want to clarify. When I say there is no Israeli-Palestinian conflict, what I mean is there is no conflict between Israeli people, Israeli citizens, and Palestinian Muslims. They live in harmony together in Israel. It works there.
You mean
what
in yeah.
there is a manufactured conflict, okay, which is funded by theocratic totalitarian regimes like Iran, like Qatar, and they fund proxies to fight their war against the West. Their enemy is the infidel. America is the great Satan, and they see as the America's outpost in the Middle East the Jewish state. There is a very real conflict between Western democracies and totalitarian regimes. That conflict exists, and it's being played out through proxies in the hottest piece of real estate, which is under Jewish control right now. Okay? And the
And
more
no
we
borders.
repeat this Israeli-Palestinian conflict phrase, which is wrong, the more we sort of give leeway to those who are ignoring the greater picture and think, well, if only we gave Palestinian Arab Muslims a state, if only we created another Islamist state in a sea of Islamist dictatorships, there would be peace. And the fallacy comes from the notion that there is an Israeli-Palestinian conflict that we have to solve, and it's not connected to anything else greater. It's a
Now,
symptom.
What's your vision of the future of a situation that would be better for both sides, for Israel and the Palestinians?
Well, my theory has always been, and it has come from my personal experience when I was 23, 24, 25 years old, risking my life traveling to Jenin, Ramallah, Tulkarm, Nablus, speaking with Palestinian Muslims, speaking with parents, going into Israeli jails, interviewing children who had been arrested for participating in violent activities, interviewing their family, interviewing leaders of terrorist organizations. Peace lies with the children. As Nelson Mandela said, there can be no keener revelation into a society's soul than the way in which it treats its own children. It must start with the children. If 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds are currently being taught in school to kill themselves and to kill Jews, and this is the purpose of their life, not to become lawyers or doctors or advocate for their community through legislative or legal processes, that is what the future will look like. It will look violent, whatever we are teaching our children, which is why it is the greatest crime of all to miseducate Palestinian Muslim children, because you are serving them a violent future on a silver platter and making it all but guaranteed that they will suffer if they are not taught in their schools peace.
Right. So what you're talking about is not some kind of, dramatic, sexy, top-down kind of, solution from the grown-ups. You're talking about just nourishing the situation with some healthier ingredients, like teaching peace and coexistence from the bottom up.
Of course.
And then whatever
how can
comes
you
out of that
impose?
is bound to be
How
good.
can you impose? How can foreign states come in who know nothing about the way the Middle East works, okay, who they've never even picked up a Palestinian textbook and read what they are teaching the future generations and their future politicians, impose a peace, okay, and continue to allow this incitement to violence occur?
It's
could
funny,
that possibly
Brooke,
work?
when people were saying that like 20 years ago, I remember like the comeback was, we don't have time to do that, right? Well, then had they started it 20 years ago, because, I heard this metaphor of trying to build a building, but then the foundation, instead of concrete, was like oatmeal. So this building could never stand, and we're agonizing over how to lay out the first story.
But we don't learn
of
our
this
lessons.
level.
We don't learn the lessons from Oslo. We don't learn the lessons. And it seems to me that we keep repeating the same mistakes, which is, what is the definition of stupidity?
Insanity.
Or insanity. And I think it's the definition of stupidity too. When you keep doing the same damn thing and think something else is going to happen.
Yeah, I know some friends of mine, they're in bad marriage for the same reason. But
well,
that's
let's
a
not
separate
go
subject.
there. But let's talk. I want to say one more thing because you asked, what is the future? How do we create peace? I really think economic interdependence is how you do it.
Oh, but before you go there, I want to stay with this crucial ingredient of teaching hatred to children, because I don't believe that any baby is born with hatred. And I sat next to Dennis Ross one night many years ago, and I asked him, he was as close as possible as you can get to a human being to the Oslo process is Dennis Ross. Hundreds, if not thousands of hours, right? And he told me his biggest regret was that they did not enforce the anti-incitement clause in Oslo. Anti-incitement is fancy language for you can't teach hate to kids and hope that peace will result.
What Oslo did, it was basically a contract. It said, we will recognize you, the PLO, instead of being a designated terrorist group, we will recognize you as statesmen, and you will receive benefits, including control over territory and people, provided you abide by X, Y, Z. And one of them was stop teaching your kids to kill themselves. Okay? Now, as a contract, anyone, it's Law 101. The contract, if it's broken, if one party does not abide by their obligations. Israel abided by its obligations. The world abided by its obligations. They recognized the PA. They recognized control over certain territory. But the PA didn't do anything that it was required to do in order to gain that type of territory and to become legitimate. So many have argued that Oslo is dead. Oslo is null and void.
Yeah, the real tragedy now is that it's like a patient who's in ER and we want to give him vitamins and complex carbs. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh my God, we're so late in the game for this. It's gone so far.
But it's never too late to do the right thing, David.
Okay.
And I have to say, the Trump administration exhibited some moral
Oh
clarity.
my God,
and
you said the
conscience.
T word.
Oh my God, Trump!
I can't believe that.
In LA.
Yeah,
Oh,
they'll
no.
never forgive me. But
I was going to say, when the funding was cut to UNRWA, which is the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which is the arm of the UN that's tasked with providing aid and education in the West Bank and has been illegally using U.S. taxpayer dollars to hire Hamas teachers and invite al-Qutla al-Islamiyya and to recruit children. And Trump, put a stop to it. We were on, you just sent me a note, threw me off there, David. But we're on the right path, I think. And he has to be, congratulated for that, as well as his move to recognize Jerusalem as the eternal capital of the Jewish people, regardless of whether you're left or right or Democratic or Republican. If you're a proud Zionist Jew, surely you need to give the president kudos for doing the right thing. You don't have to agree with his policies to recognize that.
I'm just concerned that it may be too little, too late. We got this big peace plan that we're all waiting for impatiently, and I don't know.
Well, the Palestinians have already rejected it.
Right, they did. So you were saying something before I rudely interrupted you on the economic component.
Oh, right. All I wanted to say is quite simply that when you have people who are dependent on each other to survive, to make money, one hires the other and they're employed and there's contracts and they're all shopping at the same supermarket and so forth, it is less likely that those two communities will then engage in conflict. And I think that's also what underlies the whole notion that democracies don't fight each other. Okay, democracies don't go to war with each other because number one, there are mechanisms by which they communicate and there are rules that they follow. But number two, they trade with each other, they engage with each other, and they become dependent on each other to survive. And that's why we have pacts, we have NATO, we have international treaties and so forth, because these treaties outline the way that we are economically and politically intertwined.
And when they tried, blows up like the SodaStream factory that was employing so many Palestinians.
Well, that's why the so-called pro-Palestinian movement hurts Muslims. And time again, we have concrete evidence of that.
I mean, the BDS movement.
Correct, correct. And they fashion themselves to be a movement that advocates for the right of Palestinians, but at the same time turn around and economically disenfranchise them by advocating for closing down factories that they work at just because they're owned by Jews. I mean, how racist is that?
Did you ever read the line, Nobody ever took a rental car or a car wash? 'Cause-
No, but actually, I have.
yeah. Are you different? Wow. I always knew you were
Because,
special.
when you have long-term rentals.
Right. But I mean, the whole idea is when you have a sense of ownership, you take better care of it. And
This is
that's what
true.
you're talking about. These economic alliances gives you something to lose, something that you're invested in that you want to maintain.
That is, I think, really a recipe for peace, and why so many people who don't want peace are the ones who are advocating anti-normalization, that two communities should not talk to each other, should not work with each other, should not have soccer games where their kids play together, because that is how peace is formed, and a
Right.
lasting
And anybody
peace.
from either side who's against that, I'm against. I'm all about normalization. We had it in Casablanca where I grew up. My parents, we got along with our Arab neighbors. One of my closest friends comes to my Shabbat table all the time. He's a Muslim professor at UCLA. And, the brotherhood of man, despite the fact that we have different religions, is something that's got to play in the Middle East, even if it takes 100 years. But for some reason, the presence of little Satan is getting in the way because we're seen in a whole different light. We're not seen as indigenous. We're not seen as part of Jews as being part of the Middle East. We're seen as this foreign transplant of white Ashkenazi Jews from Europe.
I
And we're
just
so
did a
beyond that.
genetic test.
Don't tell me it's
You know what I
Sephardic.
came back?
Don't tell me it's Sephardic.
25%.
I've never met an
25%
Ashkenazi
Middle
who
Eastern.
admits that they're Ashkenazi 100%. Every Ashkenazi wants to be Sephardic. Yeah.
Listen,
So 25%.
I have a
that's
great
it?
deal of respect for
Yeah.
the Sephardic community. I love their sense of community and traditionalism. I admire it.
We have a cover story coming up in 2 weeks on Jews who are not white with one
None
eyebrow.
of us are, but
Oy. So
who cares? The whole
Well,
we're
they
going
care
backwards. How can
down
we be so
there.
progressive and then so focused on somebody's skin color, or so it's in
Well,
any way determinative of their personality or who they are, how
no,
good
but
they are.
but in that region of the world, they do care, and it's constantly forgotten that Jews have an indigenous presence in that part of the world. And eventually, I mean, look, if it takes 100 years, I always want to know, like the arc of history bends towards justice in America. I so believe that, and you've seen it in the past 50 years.
Well, Americans are good people.
Well, we have
and
a
they do the
Constitution,
right
Bill of
thing.
Rights, and even the Civil Rights Movement was based on implementing the laws that were already there. But I wonder whether that paradigm, is prevalent in the Middle East, whether the time is a friend or is time an enemy. Does the arc of justice bend towards what? Does it bend towards more chaos? We can't live without
we're getting
hope.
real philosophical
That's who
here,
I am.
David.
I love philosophy. I can't live without hope. But, speaking of philosophy, so thanks for allowing me to really vent with useless talk there for a minute.
Don't you want to mention the present I brought you today?
I'll bring it
How
up
I
in a
bribed
minute.
you to do a podcast with me today?
You know what? We had dinner with your parents,
We
and they
did.
kept talking about this book.
Yes.
And wow, you got me pumped up. The Scared and the Doomed,
Doomed.
The Jewish Establishment versus the 6 Million by M.J. Nuremberger. Highly recommended.
Yeah,
by
this
Brooke
is a book.
Goldstein's
This
parents
is-
from Toronto.
This is the most depressing book I have ever read.
Why
Therefore,
is
as
that?
a Jew, I highly recommend it. So the book chronicles M.J. Nuremberger was the founder and editor-in-chief of the Canadian Jewish News, which still runs and is like the Jewish Journal in Canada.
My mother piles them up when I come to Montreal.
Good. Yes,
I
as
get
she
like
should,
30
and
of
it's
them
national.
that I go through. Yeah.
It's a wonderful paper. And he was part of a movement to try and help European Jews escape the Nazis. And he documented his experiences and chronicled how those of the American Jewish elite and the Jewish establishment in America worked to undermine those who were trying to help Jews escape Nazi Germany and the Nazis in general. And it is really a must-read, eye-opening book for one reason and one reason only, so that we do not repeat those fatal mistakes.
I'll never forget this moment. There was a play about Peter Bergson. He was one of the guys that actually really tried to do something. And he would fight against Stephen Weiss, and there was such a panic at the time because, Jews knew that millions of Jews were being murdered, and yet America wasn't doing anything. So there really was, just like you said here, and it was a play, and you can see in the play, you had Stephen Weiss, who was the leader of the Jews at the time, speaking with, the president, Franklin Roosevelt.
And telling him not to hear the rabbis, correct, who were collecting on the steps, congregating on the steps.
It was complicated.
Is that what I said is right? Is that the story that you're talking about?
Yeah, generally speaking, yeah, it was right. But this play that I saw was connected. I'm trying to look up the actual name of the play. Was actually focused on this one activist called Peter Bergson, who went crazy to try to make a difference. Eventually, they claimed that he ended up saving 100,000 lives, although he wanted to save 6 million. But I remember it was a Sunday afternoon, and in the audience was Marvin Heyer. And I'll never forget, on stage was the Marvin Heyer of the 40s, Stephen Weiss, in the Oval Office with Franklin Roosevelt. And in the audience was the Marvin Heyer of 2010, of our era. The Stephen Weiss of our era, who's Marvin Heyer.
Right.
And I would always think, what is going through his head right now? Because Rabbi Heyer, he's devoting his whole life to that. And then you see, maybe, I guess, it's a sign of how far we've come, in terms of our influence here in America. But it was just a juxtaposition I'll never forget, because it was a failure. A failure both of the Jewish people and of America.
It was a murderous failure. And it was, some have said the only thing that tops the extreme tragedy of the Holocaust is the reaction and the behavior of the Jewish community and the elite here in the United States. And what we see today, and the reason why I'm recommending to read it now, is because we tend as a community to jump through hoops to justify, those who are clearly anti-Semitic. I mean, how can any Jew justify the fact that the Democratic Party and Nancy Pelosi failed to unequivocally condemn anti-Semitism? There was a time I remember when people were arguing for Black Lives Matter to be called All Lives Matter. And the Black Caucus came out and said that's racist. And yet you see Jews now arguing that you can couch anti-Semitism and you must couch the criticism of anti-Semitism with language about Islamophobia and blah, blah, blah. I mean, the equivalent is saying that you can't pass a resolution, or Republicans wouldn't agree to pass a resolution condemning hate crimes against blacks or police brutality against blacks unless that same resolution talked about black crimes against whites. I mean, that's lunacy. And Jews are just jumping through hoops to justify this lunacy. It's unbelievable that we're making the same mistakes.
Do you think there's a price to pay for the Democrats for this?
I think that we're at a turning point, and I think that the level of anti-Semitism that has been tolerated by the Democrats to date has now risen to a national emergency. You have Democratic members of government who are campaigning with people like Linda Sarsour, who are connected to the PFLP, connected to designated terrorist groups. You have a woman who is an avowed anti-Semite who's serving on the House Foreign Relations Committee, who apparently now is in charge of shaping our national foreign policy. Our foreign policy, America's foreign policy. So are there consequences? Well, that depends on the voters if we're going to continue to turn a blind eye to what's happening. This is a real watershed moment. How the Democrats deal with rising anti-Semitism will shape what the country looks like in the future.
And, we live in a nation where free speech is an enormous right, more so than in Europe. And you're coming from a legal angle, and I wonder how many cases do you have now, Brooke?
Right now, ongoing. I just counted them before the office. I might have skipped one, but I think we have 10 ongoing cases right now. And actually coming up, besides obviously the state trial on March 18th against San Francisco State University, there is a case, the first hearing, in a case in Poland that we are supporting, together with a law firm of Dentons, where our clients are 3 Holocaust survivors, heroes over the age of 80, who are suing in an unprecedented case the publishers of Nazi material in Poland, which is illegal. It's the first time ever that they are affording themselves the opportunity to enforce the law. And we also have a very important hearing upcoming on April the 9th at the European Court of Justice, where we are going to be arguing against the discriminatory labeling practices as they are applied by the French government against imports from Israel that are connected to Judea and Samaria.
Well, I wonder if it's all going to come full circle, if there's any connection with some of your cases that's going to influence, the policy in the Democratic Party and the attitude of anti-Semitism. Because, I mean, in a certain sense, hate speech is not illegal in this country, but anti-Semitism, is that illegal?
No. You are free to be a bigot in this country, but if you engage, in commercial practices that discriminate against someone because of a protected category like national origin or ethnicity or race,
That's
that
where
is
you
illegal.
come in. Okay.
Like, you can't have a restaurant and say no blacks allowed.
I got you.
You
So your
you
cases.
can't have a company and say we don't do business with Israelis, we don't do business with the Jews, or there's too many Jews on campus. That is illegal.
All right. So you can be a bigot, but you just
You're
can't.
free to be a bigot.
You can't just can't discriminate.
You cannot engage in commercial discrimination in this country.
And all your cases have to do with some form of discrimination.
Some form of
correct?
illegal discrimination against the Jewish community or free speech issues. We also provide pro bono counsel and financial support to those who are in the counterterrorism community who are sued for writing and speaking and publishing about theologically motivated terrorism as a national security threat.
So you're a nonprofit, right?
Yes, we are.
So let's just say, for the sake of discussion, there's a billionaire listening to this podcast who really believes in what you're doing, and he wanted to give you a donation. Where would he go?
Well, first of all, I would emphasize that
He or she.
he or she, that the most important thing that we need to do as a Jewish community is stand up for ourselves. If we don't engage in civil rights litigation, if we don't, litigate and use the courts to apply the law to protect us, why on earth should we expect anyone to respect us? We got to stand up for ourselves, okay? So you could go to our website, thelawfareproject.org, spelled LAWF as in Frank, ARE. Click on the Cases tab at the top, and you will see the type of incredibly important civil rights and human rights litigation that we are engaged in on behalf of the Jewish community worldwide. And consider supporting this effort, because this is the future, okay? It's enough with letter writing. It's enough with pamphlets and pro-Israel advocacy and expressing how disgusted we are with anti-Semitism. It's time to stand up for ourselves and engage in the oldest liberal tradition, which is impact litigation. If you think about how our society is formed, the seminal cases, Roe v. Wade, okay, Brown v. Board of Education, this is how the healthy societies evolve. And there is no reason why the Jewish community cannot similarly avail themselves of civil rights protection through the courts, just like we have been on the forefront, and we invented intersectionality, and we've been advocating for the civil rights of other minority communities for 30, 40, 50 years already. It's time now to stand up for ourselves.
Man, I'm so pumped up. I'm taking the bus to San Francisco March 18th. Oh, my God. Are you going to be there?
Unfortunately, no, I cannot. But our team, our incredible team at Winston and Strawn is there, and our we have we're
It's a big day for you.
Yeah, it's a big day. It's a big day for the Jewish community, obviously for plaintiffs, and again, hopefully the school will decide to do the right thing and we can end it here and now. But
well, good. We're going to follow it, so we'll have something on jewishjournal.com right after the hearing. And speaking of defense, I know you have to take your kids to Krav Maga.
Krav Maga.
Krav Maga. Oh, Brooke Goldstein, thank you so much for coming in. Good luck with all your efforts, and we'll keep in touch on all your cases. And thanks for everything you do.
David, thank you for being such a good friend, a mentor, an amazing colleague. I'm just so honored to be back on your show.
Great. Thanks again.